Hello everyone, Harrowstorm here, and welcome to a Magicka Dragonknight PvP build for the Harrowstorm patch. This build has taken me quite some time to release, sadly with the introduction of input delay and all sort of new desyncs and new types of lag this patch. PvP has been a literal nightmare. All of this new lag on top of my existing high ping on the NA server has made it very difficult for me to PvP and test out all the different sets. And I wanted to make sure that I test every setup that I think could be viable before I release this build video, so I can ensure that the build I'm releasing is the best build that I've found effective for myself. And so it has taken quite some time, but here we are finally with this build video. For the ones of you who've been using my build from the previous patch, you're going to be fairly happy because I have come back after all the testing to the very same sets I've been using before. I might have changed a few traits or enchantments through my testing, but the sets are the same, so you won't have to farm anything if you've been using my build from the previous patch. Without further ado, let's jump right into the build and look at the stats. As you can see, our max pools are fairly high, with our max Magicka at 33k, our max health at 26k, and our max stamina at almost 20k. So very good stats to help us survive in open world 1vx. As for our recoveries, our health and stamina recoveries, as you can see, are very high for a Magicka character. However, our Magicka recovery is slightly low. Now, when we use our potion, obviously, our Magicka recovery goes higher to about 1200, but on top of it, we have a glyph of Magicka cost reduction, as well as a sustain set, which is Lich, which we'll get to in just a little bit. And so overall, this build sustains a lot better than most of my previous MagDK builds, has a lot of means to preserve Magicka and gain more of it, and so despite the low Magicka recovery number, our sustain is really good. And now going to the main kicker, our offensive stats. As you can see, our spell damage on the front bar, even just partially buffed with Seething Fury, as well as our spell power potion, is at 3.6k, and this is right now not fully buffed. When we are fully buffed, on top of this, with the burning spell weave proc, which we'll get to in just a little bit, as well as the weapon enchantment, we get to almost 5k spell damage when fully buffed. On top of the 5k spell damage, we have our spell critical at almost 50% to guarantee we have a lot of crits in our bursts, as well as our spell pan is, as you can see, at 7.2k, and that with the Drain skill that we are using as well, combined will result in about 12.5k spell penetration on our target. So our offensive stats are very solid, of course. And now if we go to the back bar and buff real quick, you can see that for our resistances, we have 27k spell resist, 23k physical resist, and 3k critical resist. On top of these resistances, we also have blood spawn, so we have about 6.5 k more resistances, and so our spell resist and our physical resist are both at over the 30k when we are fully buffed with the Bloodspawn proc. So very tanky, very survivable build, very strong offensive stats, and more than enough sustain. Our stats look really good, but let's get into the sets and what exactly we are using on this build. First off, we have our Monster Helm Bloodspawn. Bloodspawn is a really good Monster Helm for Magicka Dragonknights, especially because not only does it give us our extra stamina recovery and physical and spell resistance, which are all very important, but also we have an increased ultimate generation, which means we can not only use our ultimates more frequently, but also proc our Battle Roar passive more frequently, which gives us a lot more resources, a lot more often, and that is very important for our MagDK sustain for both Magicka and stamina. Next, on the front bar only, we have Burning Spellweave. Burning Spellweave is a really good damage set for MagDKs because it procs off of flame damage, which is the main source of damage all of our skills deal, and it gives us a lot of spell damage, 519, which is a very, very high value for one set. We can have it only on the front bar, and it will apply on both bars as long as we proc it on the front bar. We can swap to the back bar and retain our increased spell damage, so it is a very, very good one-barable damage set. And next we have the Lich, which we only have on the back bar. Lich is a really good sustain set, which once again we can use on only one bar. So when we are on the back bar, when we cast an ability that costs resources while our Magicka is low, we increase our Magicka recovery by 1k. So if we saw earlier that we had 1200 Magicka recovery, with Lich proc, we are going to have 2200 Magicka recovery instead for 20 seconds, which is a third of every minute, obviously, and so a third of the time we will be able to have an increased Magicka recovery by a whole lot. And this set, once again, we can have it only on the back bar and proc it on the back bar and then swap to the front bar, and the buff carries over. And the fact that we have the Burning Spell Weave only on the front and the Lich only on the back bar allows us to have two pieces of Potentates. And Potentates, what it does is reduces our damage taken from players by 5%. So on top of our very high resistances, on top of our sword and board, we have the Potentates as well, which increases our damage mitigation even more. Now I'm gonna go ahead and move over every single one of the pieces here with my cursor, so you are able to see exactly every single one of my pieces with the trait and enchantment. We are using in this build 5 pieces of light armor and 2 pieces of heavy. This is because I believe we gain more from an additional piece of heavy armor than we would from one piece of medium armor. That means we proc our Undaunted passives a little bit less, but we do get a lot more out of the heavy armor passives, as well as a slightly better piece that gives us more resistances. So I personally really like 5 light, 2 heavy instead of 5, 1, 1. Next up, we're going to go over and check out our skills. On the front bar, we are using Burning Embers. This skill is our main dot damage, as well as one of our most important heals on this build, as when you recast it on a target that already has this dot applied to them, you heal for a % of the damage done. So you can apply Burning Embers to multiple targets and recast it every time you need healing to regain some health while keeping the dot on your targets, dealing more damage to them. Next up, we have Molten Whip. Molten Whip, unlike the other morph, is not as spammable, and we do not spam this skill in combat. We proc this skill through the Seething Fury buff of it by casting 3 other Ardent Flame abilities every time in between our Molten Whips. And then we try to use the Molten Whip for our main source of burst, timing it together with our Leap or our Fossilize to create the best burst that we can. You can think of this skill as a Sork Curse or a Warden Shulk, kind of the damage that you build up towards and does the vast majority of the burst in your rotation. Next up, we have Flames of Oblivion. Since Molten Whip isn't R-spammable, Flames of Oblivion kind of serves that way. It is a buff that you apply to yourself, and other than giving you Major Prophecy on the bar where it is slotted, it also has this 15 seconds buff that procs 2 fireballs at nearby enemies every 5 seconds, which obviously is a very nice effect to have applied to you, but you can also spam this skill repetitively to cast these fireballs again and again and again. The tooltip of Flames of Oblivion really isn't much lower than the other morph of Molten Whip, Flame Ash, but we can use the Flames of Oblivion spam in addition to the Molten Whip burst to create a lot stronger burst opportunity. Kind of use Flame of Oblivion together with our dots to pressure the target, and then use Molten Whip to finish them off. Next we have Fossilize. which is our great stun that obviously all MagDKs use. It is a really good CC. It both stuns your target and then immobilizes them after they break out of the stun. Also deals a slight bit of damage. A little bit of expensive skill, but a very, very strong hard CC, and definitely is worth using. Next, we have Elemental Drain. This is a really, really good skill because it has two different purposes. It increases our penetration against an enemy player by reducing their resistances when we cast this debuff on them, and in addition it applies a minor Magicka steal to our target as well, which increases our Magicka sustain by giving us some Magicka every second when we damage them. That damage can be done through a dot as well, so by pairing Elemental Drain and Burning Embers together on one target, you gain more Magicka every single second. And last on the front bar, we use Ferocious Sleep, which is obviously our big burst ultimate. We use it to close the gap to an enemy player sometimes, but mostly to deal a lot of damage. We use it to both knock back the enemy target if we haven't fossilized them previously, and to deal the big burst of damage to them. A lot of times our burst would be something along the lines of applying our Elemental Drain and dots to the enemy player, using a few times the Flames of Oblivion skill, then fossilize into Ferocious Sleep into a Molten Whip to try and completely take the target to 0 health from whatever percentage they were at in the beginning of the fight. On the back bar, we are using, first of all, Meditate. Meditate is a really, really good skill to help yourself sustain. So when you go line of sight behind a wall, if you have many targets chasing you, or sometimes if you're in a 1v1, just fossilize the target, jump a little bit away from them, and then use Deep Thoughts or Meditate. You can have a solid 3 or 4 seconds in which you restore 2k Magicka and stamina every second and heal yourself as well. The important thing about this skill is to make sure you don't get interrupted, because if you get interrupted and you have to break free out of that CC that you get when interrupted, you actually waste a lot of the stamina that you gained from using Deep Thoughts. So it is very important to cancel your own skill when the enemy target comes close to you and is able to bash you. But when you have the time to take advantage of, when you line of sight, when you CC your target and move away from them, you can use a few seconds of Deep Thoughts to replenish your resource pools if you are low on them, which is a very, very effective skill. Next, we have Engulfing Flames, which is a very, very strong debuff to your target. It deals a dot damage to all the targets in a conal area. And on top of that, it increases the damage they take from flame abilities, which is most of our damage, by 10%. I know the value currently states 9, but when we are buffed up, it goes up to 10%. Next up, we are using Coagulating Blood. This is a really, really good oh shit button. This is a skill that we use to gain a lot of health immediately when we have to use it. However, it is very, very expensive despite our cost reduction glyphs, and so we have to use it very carefully and not spam the skill at all. Use it only when you really have to and you don't have Burning Embers already applied to an enemy player that you can claim the heal from. And do not spam the skill ever, because you will run out of Magicka very, very fast. Next, we are using Race Against Time. It is a very good skill to both remove snare and immobilizations that are applied to you and gain immunity to them for 2 seconds, as well as get a little bit of extra movement speed by getting Major Expedition applied to you. And on top of that, Minor Force, which increases your critical damage as well. So a very, very good skill, applies a lot of really good buffs to you, and being able to keep mobile, which is the main thing this skill does, is very, very important, especially on a Magicka character that usually has a hard time with it in open world. Next, we have Volatile Armor. This is your Major Resolve buff, which is very, very important to have on every build. And on this skill, in addition to your Major Resolve, you also get a little bit of extra damage dealt to players around you and damage returned to players who attack you from close range. So a very nice skill to top it all off and to increase your physical and spell resistances from. And last, we are using Temporal Guard, which is a really, really good skill to just have slotted on the back bar. We don't typically use Undo a lot. We usually use Leap on the front bar as our main ultimate. Temporal Guard is only used in this build to be passively slotted on the back bar, because just having it on the bar means that whenever you are on the back bar, you take 8% less damage from all sources due to the minor protection buff that you get. So you don't have to use Temporal Guard, although you might want to every now and then, but it is just really, really good to have slotted anyways to mitigate even more damage on top of all the previous sources of mitigation that we've already mentioned this build. An honorable mention is Protective Plate. It is a really good skill that I use a lot as well, sometimes instead of Race Against Time. It is a skill that also gives you the immunity to snares and immobilizations, which is very, very important. But on top of that, it also reduces your damage taken from projectiles by 50%, which is a very important buff to have if you have the room for it and can allow yourself to not use any source of major expedition, or maybe you have a different source for it in your build. I very much recommend using Protective Plate. It is a wonderful skill. Some additional relevant information. In this build, we are currently playing as a Dark Elf. Dark Elf simply has the Flame Resist, which really, really helps you against other Magicka Dragoknights, on top of having increased both Magicka and Stamina pools, which is very, very strong and effective to have. And you have the extra spell damage as well, so a really good offensive race that also has some stamina utility and gives you an edge in fights versus additional sources of flame damage like Magicka Dragonknights, Magicka Templars, sometimes Magicka Nightblades, any source of flame damage really. We are currently using the Apprentice boon to give us additional spell damage. You can also use the Mage Mundus if you want your Magicka pool to be slightly higher in the cost of some spell damage. The food we are using is Bewitched Sugar Skulls to increase our max health, stamina, and Magicka and get some additional health recovery on top of it. You could use the Longfing Pasty instead if you are looking for a slightly cheaper food to use. It has the same concept as except slightly lower stats gained and no health recovery in it, but health recovery is not super important, so it is definitely a good alternative. And the potions that we are using are Essence of Spell Power. We need to gain our major sorcery somehow, and in this build we don't use Entropy to get it, so we use Essence of Spell Power to get the major sorcery buff, as well as to restore us some Magicka. I sometimes also use Essence of Health, which are tri-stat potions that gives me all three stats. Sometimes I use this in 1vx scenarios to kind of stay alive and keep moving, but when I want to go offensive versus strong opponents, definitely the Essence of Spell Power to get the major sorcery is super, super important. For our champion points, I'm going to go over every single one of the trees. Feel free to pause the video and look at exactly what points I'm using. And that's about it. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you find this build useful and would like to use it yourself. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe for more of my content. I'll also be posting my Discord. I'll also be posting my Discord and Twitch channels down in the description and the comment section, so make sure to check those out. My Discord is the place if you have any questions you'd like to ask me about your builds or my builds or anything like that. And Twitch is where I stream live gameplay few times every week, so feel free to check that out as well to see me play this and many other classes. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next time.